like to call to order this meeting of the San Jose City Council for the morning of February 11th. Tony, would you please call the roll?
Kamei? Here. Campos?
Here.
Salas?
Here.
Cohen?
Here.
Ortiz?
Present.
Mulcahy?
Here.
Dwan?
Yep.
Candelas?
Here.
Casey?
Here.
Foley? Here. Mahan?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, everyone, welcome. If you are able, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Just as a note for everyone, we will hear today's invocation, ceremonials, and adjournment in the afternoon at 1:30. We do have a few items we'll hear in this morning's session, and we will go to orders of the day next. Does anyone on the council have any changes to the printed agenda? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we will move on. Next is the closed session report. Nora, do we have any report out of closed session?
Thank you, Mayor. We do not have a report out of closed session today.
Okay, thank you. Next is the consent calendar. Are there any items anyone on the council would like to pull from consent? Okay, do we have a motion? Okay, motion from Foley, second from Condelis. Thank you. Tony, do we have public comment on the consent calendar?
We have no cards.
Okay, let's come back to the council and vote.
Motion passes unanimously.
Great, thank you. We're on to item 3.1, report of the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no report today.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. On to item 3.3. I see Jim Shannon coming down. We will have a staff presentation on the 2024-2025 mid-year budget review report. And you all may begin whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm happy to be here today talking about the 24-25 mid-year budget review. I'm joined here with Bonnie Duong, our Assistant Budget Director, Claudia Chang, our Deputy Budget Director, Selena Ubando, our Financial Status Coordinator, arrived just on time. And we also have in the audience Bryce Ball and William Yu, our Operating Budget Coordinators, and Jennifer Tell, our Capital Budget Coordinator, who helped deeply to contribute to this report today. So the adopted budget is our financial plan predicated on the best information available at the time it is prepared. As with any budget, though, changing conditions create the need to modify the original plan. Through its budget policies, the City Council has designated mid-year as the appropriate time to perform a comprehensive assessment of the current year's budget, and the mid-year budget review report as the vehicle for consideration of any necessary budget revisions. To prepare this report, the City Manager's Budget Office, working with all city departments, analyzed the status of the city's operating and capital budgets, contained in over 137 different funds. Based on that analysis and recent receipt of several new grants and reimbursements, budget adjustments are recommended in the report for City Council consideration. Come on now. So that is our preamble. When we look at the mid-year, from a big picture perspective, our operating capital funds generally performing as expected across all of those 137 funds, with a few exceptions, which we will certainly be talking through today. Marginal economic growth we've experienced through the first half of the fiscal year, which means we're going to have slow revenue growth, and we'll talk through that a little bit too. We have a number of budget adjustments recommended in various operating and capital funds, primarily just to true up new information with the intended uses of what Council had already directed us to do in the adopted budget. As we start to go into the 25-26 budget development process, we are going in with a few headwinds. We'll cover most of that in the afternoon study session, however. Just a couple of items here for the economic conditions. Here is our level of employment over a sort of a multi-year period. The yellow lines there indicate the December, so we kind of compare a year-over-year comparison. And it's really, we have pretty stagnant job growth. So we had, I think, only 0.3% of job growth, about 1.17 million total jobs. Certainly, you know, we are higher than where we were right after the pandemic, but we haven't really grown. And so that is sort of putting downward pressure on what our revenue growth can really do. So something that we'll be continuing to model and keep an eye on as we go through the end of this fiscal year and starting into the forecast process. A little bit better news, though, on the real estate front. So when we look at single-family home, both median valuation and transactions, those are better. And so you can see here that this is the graph showing the rate of change. And so this last year through December are both our median price, the green line, and the number of transfers, the blue lines, are in positive territory in terms of growth. So that's good. You can see that we were sort of the previous calendar year, we were in the negative territory. Now we're back in the positive territory. That's certainly good. I think the challenge is the overall transaction volume is still relatively low, and we are starting to see the days on market for those properties creep up a little bit. So something to keep an eye on there too. Looking specifically at the general fund, as I said earlier, so in most categories, revenues are trending about where we thought they would be as part of the budget development process for the 24-25 adopted budget. The big exception are sales tax revenues, which they've underperformed. Tentatively, based on the limited information that we have projecting a shortfall of 25 to 30 million based on those lower sales tax revenues. We'll get into that in a second. Expenditures are currently tracking to end the year. At the moment, we're seeing savings of about $10 million. We expect that figure to grow because, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, the city manager issued some cost control directives at the beginning of September as we were starting to see this weakness in the sales tax figures. So we have a limited hiring freeze in effect, and we have some other cost controls to sort of, not to change the service level, but control costs where we can without substantially impact service delivery, because our goal is to end the year at a break-even point, whereby we think we can get savings to offset the loss of sales tax revenues so that we don't end the year in a hole. So that'll be really important as we go throughout the remainder of 24-25. So that savings of $10 million, we do expect that to grow. We'll also be able to capture some of the savings from the carryover encumbrance audit where we liquidated some of those encumbrances, so that will also help drive up that figure too. Looking at sales tax a little bit more specifically, so this is, so right now we've only received 1 quarter of sales tax payment. It's the July, August, and September figure. We got that information in November. We're going to get the October, November, December figure in about a week or two. And so we'll have a little bit better information. But what we do know so far is that the first quarter that we received is down from the prior year quarter, and it continues a trend of what we received in the last quarter of 23-24 fiscal year. And it's really across all sectors. So we're just looking at this first quarter of payment and just looking at the general sales tax. So this is the largest component of the sales tax. It's called the Bradley-Burns tax. It's the 1% of the tax that we pay. It's where we have the best data for it. Almost every sector, from business to business, where businesses sell to one another, construction, which is primarily new construction, food products, which is restaurants, that's the only one that's slightly positive. Everything else really is down here, even our general retail, our transportation, in terms of fewer numbers of new and used cars purchased, and even our county pool, which is where we capture the majority of our online transactions. So sort of sector-wide, we are sort of down. And I think that's being reflected in some of the weakness we're seeing in the tech sector in particular. So as that softness is sort of hitting the Silicon Valley a little bit harder than maybe the rest of the country is, there's also sort of a shift away. We had some pretty good stickiness or rather, after the pandemic, we had a really big increase in spending our money on taxable goods, which had been reversing a trend away from spending it more on services and non-taxable spending. We had this huge surge in sales tax related spending. That's starting to wear off, and we always expected that to wear off, but I think those factors are combining here, along with some sort of one-time payments as we kind of look back on some of the payments received in 23, 2024. The data became more available that there were some sort of one-time payments that were out there, especially on the business-to-business side, that we don't expect to see on a going-forward basis. So all of those are contributing to sort of the weakness that we see in the sales tax figures for 24-25. Again, though, we only have this one quarter of data, lots of the year to go, so our projections, I'm sure, will be modified as we get more information. And now we go for our recommended budget adjustments. And the mid-year budget review is a time where we make really, ideally we're just making technical changes to align our budget with the best information that we have available. And so we only have a very limited number of adjustments. You don't see any recommendations here to take down the sales tax revenue estimate. Again, we don't have enough information to take that down, and we don't have a really good offset yet. Our planned offset is expenditure savings throughout the organization. But we do have a couple of items. And we gather them here in the required technical rebalancing actions, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Our grants, reimbursements, and fees, this is where we receive revenue that are offset on a one-to-one basis for additional expenditures. The largest one here is we're capturing the $9 million of revenue from the state for the Cherry EIH, which we had anticipated when we went forward, when council authorized that agreement back in the last part of the calendar year. And so we had that check in hand, and now we can recognize that revenue. And then we have another items or cleanup actions. That negative $460,000 is just recognizing some savings in capital projects that are completed in the general fund that are no longer needed. That could be used as savings to offset. Because we don't really have any additional general fund revenues, our ability to make fixes or adjustments is very, very limited. A little unusual for us to be this tight during the middle of the fiscal year. And so we're trying to take some actions now that would otherwise sort of wait until the year-end process to gather our year-end savings, but we have to do some of that work now. And this is just a snapshot of some of the higher dollar amounts of the adjustments in the general fund. There's lots more that are in the book, but I know we have a presentation-heavy day today, so I wanted to limit this a little bit to just the larger items. So the only revenue that we are recommending to recognize at this point is an insurance payment for the fire at History Park that occurred in spring of 2023. So we do have that final insurance claim payment coming. And then we have a number of cost increases that we are addressing here. The first one is the elections and ballot measures. So this would account for the remaining amount of funding available in our elections and ballot measures citywide appropriation to ensure we have resources to pay for the District 3 special election, both for the one coming up in March and then the potential runoff in April. April and then June, right? And so we have wanted to lock all that up now as opposed to trying to find money for that later. We also have about $4.5 million for additional workers' compensation claims payments that are over the long run. These settlements are good for the city over the life of the claim, but when we have the payouts in the current years, we need a little more capacity in the budget to make those payments. So we had a couple of larger ones this year, and so we're making sure we have the capacity for that. Electricity costs are high. It's not a surprise there. We did under budget the electricity in the transportation department for street lights and traffic signals, so we need to increase the budget there by almost $1 million. We have an urgent capital need. We need to increase our unanticipated emergency maintenance capital appropriation in the general fund for the uninterrupted police power supply. Those batteries need to be replaced for that, so there's sort of that at end of life, they ended life faster than anticipated, and so we need to make sure we have resources there to keep that system operational. And for $570,000 is a correction of a miss that we didn't include in the adopted budget. As we transferred the tow program responsibility from planning, building, and code enforcement over to police, we transferred the staffing and the responsibility over, but the amount for the tow contract itself had been funded for a couple of years using some one-time funds that had been carried over, and it was a miss for us not to get that in ongoing in the adopted budget. So we need to do that now, and that'll be part of the ongoing budget for the 25-26 base budget process. To help offset some of these expenditures, we need to tap our budget stabilization reserve. It's $61 million currently, so this would take it down to $53 million. We try to use this reserve only when we don't really have any other options. And we try to generate other options in the document by taking down some other reserves, other expenditures, one of them being the cultural facilities capital maintenance reserve. There's $1.25 million that we allocate ongoing to rehabilitate some of our cultural facilities. We didn't have any projects planned in 24-25 just because of other busy work that Public Works is doing. And so we didn't have any projects that we would delay or impact by taking this funding down this year. That $1.25 million, however, will be part of next year's budget too. So that funding is automatically restored as part of the base budget process. And we have other items here for insurance premiums are down a little bit, so we can take some savings there. Taking down our sick leave payments upon retirement, reserve zeroing that item out, and some other savings that we can use now to sort of generate to offset some of these expenditure increases as opposed to waiting till the end of the year, which we normally would have done to recognize some of those savings. Looking at a few special funds, we have our airport operating fund. So we have 6.2 million passengers that were implaned and deplaned through December. It's down about 1.4% from last year, so a little bit down. However, we do have takeoff and landings are up by just a fraction, so that is a little bit more positive. I think another positive is that the terminal revenues are up, mostly because of additional retail offerings and advertisements in the terminal facilities. Looking at some of our construction related taxes and our capital related funds. So our construction and conveyance tax, this is our CNC tax. Actually, most of this is based on real estate transactions. That is up a little bit based on sort of additional real estate activity. We have a budget of $40 million, currently trending to about $43 million. We'll see how that goes throughout the rest of the year, but that is trending a little bit higher, so that's some good news there. For our new construction and our rehabilitation construction for private development, that drives revenue for our building and structure construction fund and our construction excise tax funds. Those primarily fund our traffic capital program. Valuations there are up for commercial and industrial, down for residential. That has a positive impact for building and structure, but unfortunately some downward impact for construction excise. So we'll keep an eye on those and adjust those as needed as we go forward in the budget process. And here we are. So we have today's study session, which is not on the slide, which kind of kicks off the discussion for next fiscal year. We've got our, we're going to reevaluate all of the data, both in the current year for 24-25 and what we're seeing for 25-26 for part of our city manager's budget request and 5-year forecast. That'll be released at the end of February. Of course, we have the review and approval of the March budget message. Based on that direction, we go forth and produce the proposed budget documents in late April, early May. We've got a number of study sessions, public hearings, and community meetings before finally adopting the final budget with the mayor's June budget message in the middle of June. So with that, we will pause here, and I'll thank the departments for all their time to put this report together, as well as the rest of the budget office, and we're here for questions.
Great, thanks for the report. Tony, do we have any public comment?
Yes, I have Riley Knight and Krista De La Torre.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Riley Knight, and I've served for the City of San Jose for 8 years. I'm currently a supervising environmental service specialist with ESD and also an active member of my union IFPTE 21. Over the past decade, every year of the city that I've been here, they've projected a deficit. We have ended with general fund surplus averaging $32.2 million annually. According to data obtained from the city, there may be up to $80.6 million in vacancy savings from the general fund. And as a city worker, I've seen all too many times scenarios in which we are the last to be fully staffed and the first to be cut. In good times and in bad, in budget crises that end up being yet another year ending in surplus. We know that expenditures are tracking below budgeted levels and are expected to generate millions in savings. Results of hiring freezes and cost control measures are expected to bring annual or additional savings by the end of the fiscal year. I urge you not to cut any vital city services or city jobs. Together, we can achieve a balanced budget that works for all of us. Budget Stabilization Reserve currently holds about $53 million, and according to operating budget, was created to bridge funding to protect against reduced service levels. In closing, I know that all of you are proud of your city and your districts, but we also want to be proud of the decisions that you make that impact all of the city workers, our livelihood, and the services that we provide City of San Jose citizens every day. Keep city workers a part of this decision-making process and in mind in every step of it. Layoffs are not a solution. The city has the funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, good morning, Mayor and City Council. My name is Krista De La Torre, and I am a representative with IFPT Local 21. We represent around 1,000 members here at the City of San Jose, from senior librarians, rec leaders, and our engineers at the airport. Like Riley said, over the past decade, the city has projected a deficit that we've been able to then end with a surplus around $32 million in our general fund. And then this year, I want to point attention to our sales tax revenue, and although it has dropped, our transient occupancy tax, business tax, and utility tax collections have all grown between 1 to 15.5% from the previous fiscal year and should exceed budgeted amounts. Expenditure savings combined with higher than expected revenue sources should be able to balance out our revenue shortfall. So as we head into the next budget budget season for next fiscal year, it's important that we be mindful of our budgeting patterns here at the city. Both this year and the years to come, we must prioritize collecting critical revenue so that unnecessary cuts to public service don't happen, including layoffs. We've made a lot of progress to staff up our city in the last couple years. Thanks to our contract efforts in 2023, we've been able to reduce our vacancy level here at the city from 11% to 9%, which it hasn't been that low in very many years, and we can't afford to undo the progress that we've been so happy to make. So I just really encourage you to be mindful of how we balance the budget next year and make sure that you're mindful that our city works only when we have great city employees, and we'll continue to serve our community. We want to make sure that we can uplift our services, and so thank you so much for your time.
Back to council.
Great. Thank you to our public speakers. Thank you, Tony. Let's come back to the council for discussion. And maybe just to kick that off before I turn to Councilor Kamei, Jim, would you just make sure we understand both kind of what the ending fund balance is every year, as well as the budget stabilization reserve, maybe a little bit about what those are, how much they tend to have, and how we should think about those dollars and kind of one-time versus ongoing. I think there might be some useful context, especially as we have a number of new members of the council.
Yeah, and Jim, I'd also like you to explain that if we have a deficit, how a deficit in a year and how we close that deficit, how it relates to having an ending fund balance in any given year, please.
Yes, those are all very good questions and good comments from the public. So we have a few different reserves that we, let's see. Let's think first of the savings that we typically anticipate as part of the budget process. So on an ongoing basis, we always assume that we'll have generally some ending fund balance available at the end of the year that becomes a source of beginning fund balance for the following year. So it's an ongoing revenue source, because even though we spend a lot of time budgeting at every different revenue category in the general fund and looking very closely across expenditures, we know, because we have a very large and complex organization, that the amount of, we are going to be wrong in some respect. And we hope to be wrong in the positive, such that there's going to be additional savings and revenue at the end of the year. And so the savings that we reference a lot was already kind of taken into account as part of our budget balancing strategy. So to the extent that we don't have year-end savings, that actually hurts our ongoing projections, because we assume on an ongoing basis we'll have some level of additional revenue and expenditure savings. And so that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about in the study session. We do have a number of reserves. So we've got the budget stabilization reserve, which is our $61 million amount. We've got a contingency reserve, which the amount is $53 million, and then we've got our $15 million workers' compensation catastrophic loss general liability claims reserve. The sum of those by city council policy should be 10% of general fund operating expenditures. So we've never really been close to that amount. So right now we are under 7% of that amount. So we are sort of below where council policy is. And that is a very sort of limited source of reserves. And those are one-time reserves, so it's not like we can tap an ongoing reserve to offset an ongoing shortfall. So the extent that those one-time resources are available, we have to be, it's only going to be able to go so far. So for a city of our size to have a budget stabilization reserve today is $61 million, and hopefully in a few moments will be $53 million. That's not much capacity that we have available to be able to balance a shortfall or be ready for unexpected activities. Also, so getting to the city manager's comment about sort of what happens with the year-end fund balance. So also by city council policy, if there is funding left over at the end of the fiscal year as part of our annual report process, city council policy says, hey, if there is still a projected shortfall for the following fiscal year, those funds should be placed into a future deficit reserve so that at least we have funding available, at least on a one-time basis, to address next year's projected shortfall. If there is no projected short, and so we've done that on a number of occasions over the course of my time here and my predecessor's time. If there is no projected shortfall, then we also would put those funds into the budget stabilization reserve or use that to offset other deferred maintenance needs or for sort of one-time urgent needs. So the only reason we have a budget stabilization reserve is because we've had some savings at the end of the fiscal year that we've been able to have that, especially that grew a little bit after the pandemic once sales tax numbers started to sort of go up. There's a lot of fluctuations in terms of revenue that was being received and savings, and so we had a little bit of a spike of revenues going in the budget stabilization reserve, but haven't really been able to add to that over the last couple of years. If there's any other questions I didn't answer, please let me know.
No, I think that was helpful. And then that 10% council policy that we have not achieved, we're at about 7%. That's for the contingency fund or the stabilization?
That is the sum of the contingency reserve, the workers'
Plus.
compensation reserve, and the budget stabilization reserve.
Those three.
And the contingency reserve, really, I mean, we should never be touching that in case we have an absolute catastrophic emergency. It only covers about 2.5 weeks of payroll. It's mandated by council to be 3% of expenditures, and so it's a very it's a reserve that we can't really spend from on a
That basically
year to
allows
date.
us to do one pay period. Is that right?
Effectively, yeah.
If we have a catastrophe
yeah.
of some kind, we can kind of get out one additional 2-week pay period. Okay, and even that 10% is not particularly aggressive. I believe there's some folks some experts who recommend a 15% threshold, is my understanding.
Yeah, I think when the city auditor looked at that, when we set the policy, I think the GFOA standard at that time was 16%. And we said, well, we're never going to get to 16, and so we sort of set 10% as a good
Don't say
working
never,
target.
but yes, for
Yeah,
today.
sorry,
yeah.
I don't mean to pessimist.
Okay, so the audit recommendation was a 16%, and we're. Council
Jim,
says 10.
Jim, the audit mentioned the 16%, but the council approved 10.
Correct,
Yes.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I just want to put that in perspective, that 10% is not necessarily a super aggressive target, even though we're not there. Okay, let's turn to colleagues. Councilmember Kamei.
Thank you. Jim, I'd like to thank you for the update as well as presentation, and thank you to your staff for all the work that you do and the briefing that we had earlier this week. I wanted to go back to page 12 and 13 of your report. And I know that all of the dollars from the History Park insurance payment has been allocated, but this is something that I thought would sort of have a nexus. And I recognize that we're not, flush with dollars, and sort of in this year and then in the coming year. But I do think that it's important to at least reserve less than 10% or $150,000 for the Sakaue House. This money would not have come had it not been for the insurance, and it would at least put a little bit back into the History Park. I don't know where you would like to move it from, but I think that it's important to bring it forward. I would also say that they have History San Jose has a very short window in which they're able to do anything, and I know that they are bringing in pledges. I would say that if by their deadline, which I think it's like September or something like that, they're not able to move it or anything like that, the move is $750,000. $150,000 is a small amount to be able to encourage, assist, at least be able to put some of those dollars back into History Park. And so I would make that request and ask my colleagues to participate in that and agree with that, moving that amount for the Sakaue House. And with that, I would move approval of the staff recommendation for the 24-25 mid-year budget review and adopt the appropriate ordinance and resources resolution amendments, including my request to hold this in abeyance to be able to see if they are in fact, if they don't raise the $600,000 to move it, then this money doesn't go to them. So it's sort of a incentive to be able to put that together.
So I haven't heard a second yet. There may be one, but I just, maybe before we entertain a second on that, I would just want to make sure we nail this down. It would generally, in this case, be helpful to have a blue memo or something that writes out exactly what the recommendation is. So can we just be, I just want to make sure if staff was clear, I wasn't totally. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about the motion. If staff could repeat it back, or Councilor Kamei, if you could just outline again. So you're moving the staff recommendation, I got that.
Correct.
And then on the funds that were recovered as part of the insurance claim for the house that was burned down in History Park, say again what the recommendation is.
So the
what the motion
recommendation is to hold $150,000 of those funds. And I know that, you know, they've allocated everything all along the way. But, you know, I leave it up to staff to decide where it's going to, you know, what's going to move, right? I'm not going to dictate to staff what area is going to move in terms of all of the different items that are listed here on page 12 of the report.
Okay.
So
what I want to understand is the implications of that and where those dollars come from, because currently we're balanced, and I'm not clear on, I just want to make sure I understand the chart, where they're currently going and what would have to change for that to work.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so right now, those insurance proceeds are part of the overall strategy to make sure that we can pay for all the other critical items that are in the mid-year budget document right at the moment. So if we took $150,000 out, we'd have to defund something else that's in the mid-year budget.
So the other thing you could do, Jim, is just take it out of the budget stabilization. You know, that's an option that staff has. I think that $150,000 is not a lot to ask for. And I think that it does create that nexus between what happened at History Park and what we want.
So for the motion to be viable, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, we're going to need both the proposal, I think I think we're close, but I just, for it to even be something the council can vote on, we need to specifically identify the offset. If you want to propose the stabilization fund, you can, but
you know,
we gotta.
I was going to leave it up to staff, but I would then suggest that it come out of the budget stabilization. If for any reason they don't raise the money, they can't do it, then it would go back into budget stabilization.
Okay, so there's a possibility it wouldn't be used, but nonetheless, for purposes of taking action today, we have to identify an offset because we have to be balanced.
That's fine.
Okay, we've got we'll hear from a couple of colleagues, we'll see. I haven't heard a second yet, but we've got a proposed motion hanging out there. Let's go to Councilmember Ortiz and then Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jim, for your presentation. I know that you're going to be working very hard this budget season, so I just appreciate your dedication and expertise. I just have two quick questions. What's the status for the reserve encumbrances and how does that all work?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember. Am I still on? Yes. Yeah, so our goal was to provide you the final report as part of the mid-year budget review. We don't have that today. We did have a little bit of write-up there. So all the departments are done with their process to do the liquidations as part of the RBR, the reserve balance report. But there's still work that finance has to do to sort of manually walk that through our financial management system to see what the actual budgetary savings are. And so, like the auditor mentioned, sort of the technology we have there is not ideal, so there's still some manual process. So we weren't comfortable saying what the actual final savings is, but we plan to either at the next bi-monthly financial report at PISFIS or in the proposed budget document, we will say what that number is. We think we just need another month or so for finance to be able to complete that work, where we can say, is it the $7.6 million that we had said before, or is it a different figure? That would contribute to the additional departmental or the additional savings so that would add to that $10 million that I currently showed on the slide there. So that would help our year-end fund balance issue.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I have one more question, just for like historical purposes, especially for new council members who this is going to be their first budget process. To give perspective, what has been the general fund ending balance for the last couple of years? Do you have any information on that? Maybe going back the last 5 years?
Yeah, so when we look at the ending fund balance for after, we have the truly available ending fund balance after we do the cleanup and rebudget actions as part of the annual report. Last year, it was $2.4 million, which was super, super low. We had $18.5 million or $18.6 million for the 22-23 fiscal year. We had a couple of larger years for the pandemic. It was 33.7, 61.6. And over the multi-year period since 11-12, the average has been around $17 million or so.
Okay, thank you for that. That's good for us to know, to understand that there has been ending balances, but I know that this is kind of an odd year, and we are seeing a huge threat. But good to know. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Councilmember Cohen.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for coming forward with a robust plan just to sort of close out this year with a balanced budget. And just to be clear, this action is about making sure that we make the adjustments we need for the remainder of this fiscal year. Well, I think we're all aligned, and we've been very aligned, and Councilmember Kamei, we're aligned on the project to make sure that the Sackaway House is moved to History Park. What you're asking for really is an allocation from next year's budget and not an allocation from this year's budget. Regardless of whether we put the money in abeyance or not, this sounds like a commitment to that, which isn't necessary to make at this point. And it's really an allocation out of the reserve. It's not an allocation out of, it doesn't matter what, in my mind, whether it's an allocation out of that History Park money or out of the reserve. My problem is that we had a very robust conversation with History San Jose about their commitment and giving them a one-year timeline to raise the money. They felt very confident they were going to raise the money. What I don't want to do is signal to them that they have to raise $150,000 less because the city is prepared to pay the $150,000. Now, we can have a conversation later in the spring if we find out that they're having trouble. I mean, we have many months ahead in our budget process, and my thinking is by April and May, we should have an idea as to how successful they're being in their fundraising. They had said they planned to have the house ready to move, the money raised and ready to move by April. The house is being moved in March from its current spot to a temporary location. I'd like to have that conversation with History San Jose to see how they're going before we signal that we're going to provide a portion of the funding, because they had made it very clear that they felt that they could raise the money. So I'm uncomfortable signaling that a portion of the $600,000 that they plan to raise would be paid by the city so that they then can back off on their efforts to raise the full amount of money. So I'd prefer not to make that commitment today, but to have that be a budget memo in the spring if we so decide that we need to then provide them with some additional money to meet their objective. So that would be my feeling, and I would prefer not to make that decision today at this meeting.
Okay. Thanks for those comments. I think it's a reasonable perspective. I'm not seeing any other hands. We don't have a second on that motion. I would entertain another motion, or I do have a hand up from Councilmember Kamei. So let me come back to Councilmember Kamei.
I guess my idea was the nexus between the dollars received from the insurance money, which made it much more, how can I say, relevant in that, you know, it's an incident that happened at the park. We got 1.57 from the insurance dollars, and we're not replacing anything or doing anything in the park. I get it, but I also think that I don't want to wait until the fall for them to be able to move the house. I mean, I thought sooner rather than later, but I understand what you're saying, so I withdraw my motion.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have another motion? I don't see any other hands. Would anyone like to move staff recommendation?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Great. Thank you. All right, I don't see any other hands. Tony, let's vote.
Mayor, I'm sorry, can I make just one clarify?
Please.
I answered the question, I want to make sure I get it right. For the ending fund balance that I was talking about before, over a 10-year period, the additional available average annual ending fund balance was 20.7. If you take out those 2 COVID years, which were sort of unusually large, that would drop to 14 million.
Okay, so without the 2 COVID years, which we all acknowledge were weird years, the average has been, you said 14?
Yeah, and I just think it sounds like a large amount, but it's, we shoot to be within 1% of our sources and uses of trying to, with a margin of error on a budget as big as we have. We've been like less than 0.5% or even less than that. And in an accuracy call, it's been pretty darn close. We don't want to have a large ending fund balance in any given year, but bigger than that, we don't want to end in the red, which is what we're trying to battle against this year.
Yeah, and that would be, it's a 0.7%.
0.7%.
0.7 to 0.5% variance.
0.5%. I mean, that is extraordinarily close. I would challenge to look at any other city across America if they're getting their estimates that close.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. So just for everybody's clarity, we want, as a matter of our kind of approach to this, and as any city would, we want to err to be in the black, not the red, each year. If we're in the black on average 1% or less, we're doing extremely well at optimizing the budget, and to try to cut it any closer would actually put us at risk of being in the red and having a real problem at the end of the budget. Is that fair to say?
I'd say that's a fair, accurate
I put it in
assessment.
layman's terms,
Yes.
not being a budget director myself.
Yes, I think that's fair. And, we have probably over 400 different revenue sources in the general fund. If I still have when I used to do the revenue forecasting, she's nodding yes. So they're all moving for different reasons and growing and have different drivers for them. And then we have, thousands of appropriations we're monitoring. That's why narrowing it into that 1% or less, and again, we've been at 0.07%, we've been at 0.5% or less, is extraordinarily good.
Well done, budget team. Okay, all right, we've got a motion on the floor. I see another hand. We'll go to Councilmember Mulcahy and then maybe be taking a vote here. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one. Thanks, Jim, for the briefings that we had. And the conversation the mayor and city manager were just sort of bringing up around a few things kind of struck me. So when you were talking about sales tax, and we talked a little bit about this before, thank you for sharing the percentages of where those are at and where we're performing. Since we're all going to be anticipating those numbers moving forward, I'd love to see the breakdown of the dollars for each of those categories, as opposed to just a percentage. Of that 30 million, what's attributed to what? I know B2B is going to be a big chunk of that. But some of the things that I'm going to want to be talking about in terms of priority setting for the next year's budget is how we can do better to support greater sales tax drivers throughout the city. I want to know, like, general retail. What is that made up of? And how much are they responsible of the overall sales tax numbers? So I don't know if anybody else has an interest in that, but I'd like to see the real dollars tied to those percentages and in those specific categories that you've spelled out. Is that possible?
It is, and I'm looking at some data right now that we have. It's going to be hard to sort of to talk through because we do have, and we do show, when you look at the general sales tax component, we do break out the percentage of the revenue by category. So there is a spot in our mid-year budget review where you see the percentage by category, and we can probably find what that page is real fast. And it is on page.
Jim, if we're not able to do it now in the afternoon session, we have a slide that talks about the different sectors.
Yes.
I mean, maybe you can just kind of give us general.
Yeah, so maybe we'll try to update that a little bit. That's also a percentage based, and we'll see if we can throw something up that also has some dollars associated with it.
And then also maybe a brief description, what are the types of things in each category? Though just some general.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Breaking it down.
Thank you, that'd be great.
Great. Good ask. Okay, I don't see any other hands. Tony, let's vote.
Motion passes 10-1, with Kamei voting no.
Okay. All right, great. Now, as I understand it, we are Everything else has been agendized for the afternoon. Let me just make a point before we adjourn, at least to my colleagues. We do have a very robust priority setting session. We'll get a lot of context on our current fiscal situation. There'll be an opportunity, I'll say a little more later, but there'll be an opportunity for council members to weigh in, for the public to weigh in. I'm going to ask that we keep invocation, ceremonials, and adjournment to, as the guidelines I distributed at the beginning of the year, 5 minutes each, and that we get into the content of the meeting at 1:30. But I'll look forward to seeing everybody then. So we're going to adjourn till 1:30. Thank you all. I'm sorry, we're going to recess until 1:30. No, I knew Nora was going to get me in trouble there. All right, we'll see you all at 1:30.